Hello and welcome everyone to our discussion today. My name is Michelle Gerson. I'm the VP of Marketing here at Wallarm. And today we're here to talk about the aftermath of the AWS outage and how to build systems that survive. I am joined by Tim Ebbers, our field CTO and STO for Security Edge. Before we get started, Tim, why don't you give a quick introduction of yourself to let the audience know who you are and why we're here discussing this today.
Oh, welcome everyone. My name is Tim Ebbers, as Michelle said. I have a number of roles, but the reason why I'm on the webinar is one of my past lives and current lives are building highly available dual active data centers, and we'll go into that. But after the AWS outage, we thought it'd be good to talk about it since everybody else is still talking about it. We might as well get a webinar in and talk about it, even though it doesn't necessarily correlate directly with security. Security has a lot of implications around creating and developing dual active data centers.
Amazing. All right, well, we're really excited to dive in today. So to kick things off, we will go to a quick agenda. We're going to go a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We're going to be covering a couple of key topics on our fireside chat today. Obviously, we're going to be setting the stage and really talk about what happened in the AWS outage. We're going to be talking about the myths of the cloud. We're going to be going into some lessons learned. And then, of course, we have the cost versus risk trade-offs, followed by some real-world war stories from our very co-host, Tim Ebbers. And then we'll be wrapping up and talking about what you can do for tomorrow, and then, of course, how Wallarm can help. So before we dig into the meat and potatoes of the content, I wanted to remind everybody that this session is being recorded and you will get a copy after the live event ends. Additionally, please, we encourage you to ask questions at any time. All you have to do is mouse over to the chat feature. It looks like the text bubble within Zoom or within LinkedIn. And please enter your questions. My job as the moderator is really to facilitate the discussion, not only between Tim and I, but between the audience and us as well. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. I will be looking at them throughout our discussion today, as well as covering anything we don't get to at the end. We're looking to be about 45 minutes, including the Q&A, but if we need to go over, we can go over just a tad. And then lastly, feel free to stay connected. Follow us on LinkedIn, okay? So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and we are going to dig in to the content itself. So, Tim, again, welcome to today's session. I really wanted to start off the conversation with talking about the obvious. What happened with AWS this time, and why did it ripple so widely?
Yeah, what happened? I think that's been the question that everybody's been asking for the last 3 days is what happened? I think some information came out overnight, but what we know is probably different today than it will be in 3 hours as information continues to trickle out. So let's talk about the facts and what we do know. AWS had an issue in East 1, which took a large number of customers out and made outages and created outage for a large number of customers. We also know that there wasn't external routing changes, thanks to our friends at Thousand Eyes. This didn't seem to me like an external event. It definitely seemed like an internal event. So we know that. And then I think this morning, as I was looking through any new information that came out early this morning, we did see that this seems to be related to internal DNS. And that internal DNS caused issues in and amongst the DynamoDB, which AWS uses for a large number of events and provisioning events through their environment. So we know a lot about what happened. I see that Rich threw in the RCA, and we'll look at through that RCA. But really for us, it's an outage, and there was a large number of applications that had outages. at the same time. So while we won't spend a lot of time digging into what happened um, with Amazon, the biggest point for this webinar is uh, a large outage with East One. East One controls many of the different services that Amazon has, and the point that we will make throughout the conversation is it's hard to build highly available, always on systems, even for the hyperscalers.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, I mean, I guess another question as we're talking about this from a broader stroke is, has this happened to other providers or is this just an AWS thing?
No, it's happened with other providers, and AWS is actually one of the most stable providers that exist in the big three or big four or big five, depending on if you include CDNs or not include CDNs. AWS is actually the most stable across the board. So the nice thing about AWS is they're mostly always online, and that's why everybody uses them. But then when they take a little blurb, so does a lot of the internet. So um, it's hard to not notice when they have little issues. So the good thing about it is it was just one region. The bad thing about it is it's a region that many people are in from across the internet. And I know Security Edge, our cloud product, is also in East One. So we'll get into that a bit later, and we talk about what we saw as a customer of AWS during that time. But the biggest thing here is that they did cause an outage, and it did cause a ripple effect across probably the globe. It's probably safe to say the globe, but at least across the US.
Yeah. So, I guess kind of shifting gears a little bit, can you tell us like what kind of assumptions did it challenge for infrastructure architects and cloud teams?
So much have we come to rely on the always on nature of clouds. Um, and we'll talk a lot about the misconceptions of the cloud. The cloud is just a group of data centers that have automation in between them and create services that you pay for. It's no different than you hosting it yourself. It's just at a larger scale with a lot more people and a lot more data centers. But they can and will fail if not architected correctly. Uh, Architecture and design are the key things about making any system highly available, from the small app that's on your iPhone that's not doing a ton to any major order management system. It's all about how the architecture works and looking and really understanding how much risk are you willing to take and how much money are you willing to spend to avoid that risk. Um, so the key thing here is really about the risk reward. Um, I've been doing highly available dual active data centers my whole career. It's not easy. It takes time and it takes great partnership across the board. And we'll talk a lot about that. But really, the misconception of the cloud is that it's always on. Um, the uh, the myth is if you put it in a cloud, it won't ever go down. Um, that's just not true. You can poorly architect a system in AWS as easily as you can poorly architect a system running on your desktop. Um, so it's not easy to architect a good system. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes partnership across the organization.
So before we get into dual active data centers, I guess the question I have for you thinking about the misconceptions of the cloud is, what do we mean when we say resilient architecture in 2025?
Yeah, so this is good. Resilient is an interesting term, and it gets more interesting as you lose more and more control and give it to a cloud provider. So I saw David. So I've got a couple of different screens running here. So I saw David in LinkedIn. Is multi-cloud the only solution? It's an interesting question, especially in the days of today. How much do you rely on any one vendor? How much do you rely on their data centers and their regions? Well, what we know now is availability zones aren't highly available. That's pretty clear. So then the question becomes, are multi-regions highly available? And are they resilient enough? And that's really a business question. It's not a technology question, right? Technologists, we can build for anything. Like we're good at building stuff. That's what we do. And we are great at taking complex business problems and turning them into solutions and delivering them for the business. That's what we do. That's our bread and butter. So then it just becomes a business conversation. Is the business willing to pay for the cost, the time, and the effort to drive highly resilient architectures? I think the thing to contemplate is, do you want to put all of your eggs in one basket, or not? And that's really, you can architect across multi-clouds. It's hard because everybody does services a bit different. Actually, owning it yourself is a little bit easier because you can create consistency across data centers and across networks easier than creating consistency across multiple clouds because they do it all different. Let's just take a very simple example. Let's just take a WAF. And I create a signature in one. That's different than the way that I create signatures in one. And I know that there's tools with Ansible and Terraform that do a great job of trying to extrapolate and create distance between the actual service and what you're doing, but it's still different. So it's really hard to really drive consistency when you've got two different providers doing it very differently. But then the question becomes are regions enough in a single data center? And with the outage yesterday and Dynamo going down and a lot of the IAM roles across the board going through East 1 in order to drive roles, that's a question you have to ask yourself. Is it enough? And there is no right or wrong answer here. This is really a business conversation of, what did you think? How did Monday feel? Did it feel okay to you? And if it did, then fine. How much money did we lose? Because there was money that was lost on Monday. I know when I worked for Victoria's Secret, we knew down to the hour, down to the minute, how much money we would lose if we were to fail. And so we architected systems that were dual active. We had data running in multiple data centers, and that wasn't easy. And it took joint effort by the applications team, by the network team, by the traffic routing team. Now, luckily, many of those teams were underneath the same organization, so it made it a little bit easier because we were totally focused on keeping the website up. But really, the thing that has to drive how resilient you can be is, how did Monday feel?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, we're talking about some of the misconceptions of the cloud. You've mentioned the dual active data centers. You've talked about your past at Victoria's Secret and what you did back then. The question that I have for you now is, what did you do right back then? What did you do right back then that cloud teams are missing today?
And I don't know that it's necessarily cloud teams, right? So let's talk about it from an organizational standpoint. Clouds allow you to go fast, but going fast doesn't mean you don't architect it for the availability, the reliability that you need for that particular service. It doesn't mean that everything has to be architected the same way. So you have to, it goes back to the risk management side of security, which is one of the big pieces that are a part of creating dual active data centers.
Yeah.
Which is risk. Which applications make the money? Which applications don't? Right? I am not going to take I'm not necessarily going to take an application that doesn't have revenue driven through it and create it into an architecture that's multi-active. Like, it doesn't make any sense to try to replicate that data in an active format with applications across data centers, with queuing that you might use for data isolation to move data from one data center to another. It's just too complicated. Why would you do it for that? So the thing that you really want to drive is, what are the applications from a risk perspective that are most important to the business? The business knows which ones they are because they did not feel good about them on Monday. And so this is a great time to be going back to the business and go, look, we had an outage. It was because of our provider, not their fault. They're really stable, right? AWS is, like I said, the most stable, if you look at it over the past years, the most stable hyperscaler out there. So did you like and were you okay with that outage? And if not, which ones hurt the most? Like this is the perfect time to get in with the business and look at budgets for next year. Like budgeting season is either just passed or is probably either coming up. Um, it's now a good time to talk about what are we going to do differently, if anything. And maybe the answer is not anything, but not talking about it when this happens again, because it's going to. Now they're going to come back and look at you again and go, well, we didn't do anything different. And like, well, you didn't tell us to. Well, now technology needs to take a step up here and go, look, something happened. We need to talk to the business and we need to do it differently for next time. Or we don't, but I want to have a discussion with you about it so that we are looking at it together versus looking at it in silos.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we started kind of going down the path of sort of the cost versus the risk trade-off. A couple of different things come to mind, right? Especially when we're thinking about sort of the people across the organization, right? On the one hand, some execs will say it's too expensive. So what's your recommendation in sort of how to frame that conversation around the real cost of downtime?
Yeah, for us, so there are two places where I've done dual active data centers. One was at United Airlines. For those of you that don't know, I was one of the team that was on the unitedAirlines.com team during 9/11, and we kept that website up while all of the other websites were going down. So that was a dual active data center design that we were very proud of. The incident was horrible. But the fact that we were able to keep the website up to get information out to people was very satisfying. So for us, it was always working with the business. We had a goal in mind of what we had to plan for, right? If you've ever been in the airline or the transportation vertical, you're typically always planning for a disaster and hope that one never happens. And so you're always prepared if one does, and you practice those scenarios. And we'll talk about practice a lot. And so we were prepared for the chaos that ensues when an incident happens. When we built similar outcomes, which is dual active data centers at Victoria's Secret, the same thing. We would actually use all of our data centers for traffic at the same time, and then move data around through a number of different technologies. But the thing is we practiced, right? This wasn't a tabletop practice, right? We were literally driving traffic every day, every week while we were doing deployments. We would switch traffic from data center to data center so that when something bad happened, it was a flip of a switch, and the guy and the group would fail the people to a data center that we knew was working. And so we could fix the problem in that data center without any issues. And we were ready for it because we did it every day. Every day, every time we had a deployment, we were ready so that when the chaos ensued, when something bad happened, because it did, like we had outages during holiday, stuff didn't work the way we expected. But we were able to shield the business as well as our consumers, as well as our customers from that, because we were just failed them to another data center.
Interesting. I mean, I'm curious from sort of around the room and around the world of those who are listening. It'd be interesting to see, if you guys could put a little thumbs up or a +1 if you guys are running dual active data centers. I'd love to get a read from the room. How many of you guys out there are familiar with that concept or running that concept? Just for sake of discussion. Give everyone a second maybe to type that through if anyone chats that in.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions here that we'll answer while you're waiting. So again, we talked about is multi-cloud the only solution? In my mind, it's one of the only solutions, right? Because you don't get to see under the covers of what any one vendor does. And so when you look at your business critical applications, multi-cloud is one of the few ways that you could do it. Now, whether that cloud is Amazon in your own data centers, whether those are two of your own data centers and each data center is considered a cloud to you, whether that's two hyperscalers, like what those things are is irrelevant. But what you have to maintain is two complete copies so that one can go down. Literally, you can pull the plugs, and we would practice doing this, literally shutting the network off and seeing what happens. And if you don't practice that, then you're never going to be ready for the chaos, right? There were people scrambling on Monday, and I know they were, because nobody was expecting that. And so if you don't play in the chaos, I'm a big fan of Chaos Monkey, and just creating chaos in the environment. You're never going to be prepared for when the chaos happens. And then I see another one here for third-party vendors. Right, this is a tough one. And so again, I would go back to the third-party vendor and ask them, what are you doing? Right? SLAs are great, but really they're an insurance policy. So for maybe email isn't business critical. Most companies it is. So what are you going to do about it? So if you're going one direction, now you're going to have to go back to the vendor and go, well, either we need to do this differently, or how are you going to do this differently? And I know, we'll talk about how we do it in our application here in a couple of points as I'm reading them through. So we'll talk about how we do it. But the answer is you're going to have to push on that third party and review their architecture to understand why they had outages when that went down. Now, maybe you need to push on them to be multi-active. And that's what I would start doing. I think it's up to the customers to really drive their technology partners into where they need to be as a business. And if they're not willing to do that, then maybe you need to make different business decisions on who the partners are. Is dual active hard? Absolutely. Running data centers is hard. Just ask AWS, just ask Microsoft. Like, this is not an easy thing to do with the number of customers that all of these vendors have. But if the customer is just going to be okay with it, then all of the vendors are going to do nothing.
Yeah. I mean, maybe just to dig into that a little bit, can you explain why it's so hard to set up dual active data centers and what the critical challenges are there?
Yeah. So the network is been a solved nature for, I would say, for a long time. So network redundancy, the network guys have always done a super great job of providing in data center, multi-switch, multi-router, failover, redundancy in the packet level. So that's always been easy, not easy to do, but we just have relied on it now. And so as you go up the stack, you've got data next, and data is probably the hardest part of this. Data is hard because it has to maintain consistency. And how are you going to maintain consistency? What are you going to do in case of collisions? And so data always becomes the hardest part. And I know there are a number of ways to do this. There's not just a way, but data is the hardest thing to do. And so what you can't do is do it in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And so data is the hardest. Applications are next. But typically your application servers are connecting to the data servers. And so having another copy of those is not necessarily hard. And then traffic routing has to be done correctly so that they can see what's going on from the outside. Those health checks are always important. But really it's about data and how do I deal with my data so that it doesn't, so that it maintains consistency across the data centers.
Okay. So I have two questions, one from LinkedIn, but one that's a little more closely tied to what you were just talking about. So let me ask this one first, and then I'll follow up with one that came in through LinkedIn. But the AWS event started in the control plane, but cascaded into the data plane. What lessons should architects take from the dependency isolation?
Yeah. So I'm going to correct you because it actually started in the data plane. So it started in
Ah,
DNS. So DNS had DNS issues. The DNS to me is straight in the data plane.
okay.
Now it affected the control plane, which then affected the data planes. And so it was a cascading effect. But DNS, from everything that I've read, and honestly, I haven't read all of the reports and every little thing that's come out about it. But from my understanding, it was actually the data plane that caused issues first. You couldn't resolve DNS, and after you can't resolve DNS, then the control plane went out, which drove the data plane issues. So it was actually just it was DNS issues internally and not externally. So they have a split DNS setup, and anybody that knows AWS knows that they have, or typically knows that they use split DNS. So it was an internal DNS issue from what I understand. Um, and then that cascaded across the control plane with DynamoDB not being able to get to the endpoints. And then that just cascaded from there. So, dependency isolation is incredibly important. Um, Knowing what affects what, those services maps that nobody likes to draw because they're changing all the time, actually is important. And then understanding how that control plane and how those data planes mix.
Mm,
Um, DNS is the backbone of the organization usually. If DNS goes down, typically everything else around it goes down. So how do you make that highly available? Um, and so the guess, and I don't know, I didn't read that RCA yet, so I didn't see that it came out. The guess as of yesterday, when I stopped looking at this, was there was a change that went out that that created havoc in the DNS world, um, which seems plausible because that seems to be what had happened, which then caused ripple effects across the board. So you have to understand how everything depends on each other, because when you're making a change, you have to understand how it's going to affect the things downstream. And that's why we would always, at VS, we would always fail. And at United, we did this as well. We would fail out of the data center we were making changes in because it was just easier than having to deal with an outage if it happened. And it was easy. Like we'd planned for it. We had automation that would fail people over the night, the morning of. We'd come in, do changes during the day. It was great because we did everything during the day and nobody knew we were making changes. And I think there's pros and cons of doing multi-active data centers. One of the pros is you can do changes whenever because there wasn't a need to have a maintenance window because everything was isolated.
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for correcting me. I appreciate that. So a quick question that came in from LinkedIn. I'm just going to read this here. It's, are we overreacting to an issue that may not have happened again in our professional lifetime? I have seen issues like this take up hundreds of hours of our engineering time, only not to ever happen again. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think our CEO posted a blog yesterday about all of the outages that we've been seeing across the clouds. If you go looking across all of the outages, this isn't isolated. Um, is this particular, will we ever have another DNS Dynamo issue? AWS is really good at looking at what happened and doing postmortems, and I'm sure that they will figure out what happened and not let it happen again. They're very, very good at that. Love AWS for that. So is this particular thing going to happen again? Probably not. Are data center affecting things going to happen? Absolutely. Every time you put a change in, there's risk uh, for something to happen. So again, it goes back to risk reward. I'm very much a risk reward guy. We did dual active at Victoria's Secret because it was great for the business and it was great for the engineering teams. So a lot of it has to be in partnership with your business. We were able to do it for we actually used our extra capacity for performance. So it's a good way to look at the capacity that you might have or that you might commit to and use it for a performance environment. We love that. So we put full load on one of our data centers for performance testing to make sure all the components were working. So that's another great way of using the capacity. So there's ways to do it. Will it take time and energy? Absolutely. But that's why you don't do everything, right? You do the things that make business difference. And that's why now is the perfect time to be talking to the business about what hurt the most, because something hurt the most, and then start going down from there. And that's, in both organizations, we were very lucky to have wonderful business people sitting literally, aisles away from us, that we had great relationships with. And, I love spending time in the business. The business is always has a unique perspective on what's going on, and um, getting in touch with your business folks. Don't leave that up to some VP or some CTO. The people at all levels have different perspectives, and it's fun to get the different perspectives and put them in the room, and drive what you want to do as a business as you go forward.
Yeah. I mean, you've been talking about your experience at, Victoria's Secret and United Airlines, in terms of dual active operations. What's one time when your design, you've talked about when your design saved you, but was there any time that, it didn't, and what happened?
Yeah, there were times that it didn't save us. A lot of it was because we didn't practice enough. So in the beginning, when we started doing this, and started working on the dual active at VS, it wasn't perfect. So in the beginning, we took a lot of practice to get good. And every time we did it, we saw another blind spot. Even on Security Edge, and we can talk about that for a little bit. Security Edge is a platform that we created here at Wallarm. That's a dual active multi-cloud environment. So we host across clouds, across regions, and we host our product like that, in the data plane. And even yesterday, we found blind spots in what we were doing, right? Our metrics, our telemetry, all based on a number of things that caused us issues, that we need to go back and think about. How are we going to do it differently? How should we do it differently? If you lose your telemetry, you've lost all of your eyes. And so we mostly were okay on the data side. There was a few hiccups on the network side that we saw later on in the incident. But we were mostly okay across our platform. But we lost our telemetry, which isn't good. Like every problem, every time something happens, it's always great to see those failures to lead to wisdom and how we're going to do it differently. That's merely just a discussion with the engineers of how we're going to do it. So we have a whole Confluence page around what we saw, and how we're going to do it differently next time. There will be a next time. Something will go wrong. So I get that we may not have this exact incident for our lifetime, but there will be another one. To me, that's that's clear because um, we keep having changes, new technology are always going to be coming out. So to me, there will always be issues that people didn't anticipate as they roll out different types of code, different technologies, um, into the environment.
Yeah. So just to ground our audience a little bit, you mentioned Security Edge. Do you just want to give our audience a little bit of information on what Security Edge is, and then maybe we can talk a little bit on what we did for some of our customers during Monday's outage?
Yeah. So Security Edge is our take on supporting our SaaS platform. Um, we have these filtering nodes. These filtering nodes we host for our customers. They're instances that we can actually create, and put in multiple regions and multiple clouds. They don't have, we created them from the beginning not to have a specific state. They're they actually get updates as they're spun up to get state that can come from multiple numbers of places. as we spin up those nodes, right? So we designed it not to have a state, and then we took that thought process of not having states and created the ability to be across data centers and across clouds to make it easy for our customers, right? We know that multi-cloud is not easy. And so what we wanted to do is make our product easy for our customers so they didn't have to choose. Do I want to be just in a region? Or do I want to be in multiple regions, or do I want to be in multiple clouds? We have the ability to do all of that. And so on Monday, when we started seeing data problems on the data side with network connectivity, we actually failed people over to the west. Took us about 3.5 minutes, and they were going again. So we kept them in AWS. We just flipped them to the west region, and everything normalized. So. But again, being able to do that and knowing that we could was much easier because we'd practiced it than if we hadn't. Now, still some things that we want to do, still some things we need to go research, but it was nice to be able to see that, and we'll make it even better.
So I guess the question I have for you is, if there's one takeaway for architects who are watching today, what can they learn from Security Edge's design philosophy about building not just secure, but truly resilient systems?
It takes time, energy, and effort. It's been,
To
years
add
long.
practice too,
Yeah,
because you've been.
practice. Yeah, practice. Operations to me is nothing different than a team sport. You have lots of teams. Your sport is a big technology ecosystem, and you have to practice. I'm out riding and roping as much as I can every day, and everything takes practice. And failing over data centers, running a highly scalable infrastructure takes practice, and it takes energy, it takes teamwork, and if you don't have all of those, something's not gonna work right. In a silo, any one of the pieces can work, but the whole thing falls apart. And so the culture of DevOps is really where the dual active shines. And I saw that at United Airlines before DevOps was a thing. Having that culture of the applications team sitting next to the database team, sitting next to the infrastructure folks, we didn't always get along, but we always were together as a team. And I guess we always got along. We didn't agree all the time, but we always got along, and we always drove to a common outcome. And having that togetherness, I saw that at Victoria's Secret, and I see that here as well. And I think that's a common thread that I see. Call it DevOps, call it DevSecOps, call it really whatever you'd like. That's really, really important when you're looking at designing multi-cloud environments, because everybody needs to have a seat at the table because they all have different perspectives.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So when an outage happens again, what would you want our audience to do differently after sort of having this discussion with us today?
I think be calm in the chaos. As leaders, you have to be calm in the chaos. And as soon as you start getting excitable, you miss perspectives because you're trying to get and solve a problem that may not be there. That and work with the business now before another one happens, so that you guys are all aligned on what's going to happen when we do it, right? I don't know if anybody pulled out their DR plans on Monday and brushed them off. That would actually be interesting to know if anybody did that. Because the question then becomes, when do you pull that trigger? How much time is enough to pull that trigger, to brush off the disaster recovery plans and implement the disaster recovery plans? 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. Have a time, right? Work with the teams and have a time, which is one of the reasons why I've always loved doing dual active data centers, because the time is now. And it's as soon as you see a problem, you fail traffic. Like that's always been our nomenclature. Don't ask, fail first, and then we can go see if it's really a problem. And that's the nice thing about dual active is you can fail quickly and then realize that there's not a problem and go, oh, well, we'll just need to fail or normalize traffic between the two data centers. And it's always nice to be able to have options.
Yeah. Well, I guess like in conclusion, just going back to sort of the cost risk piece, and your experience at, United Airlines, Victoria's Secret, and of course here at Wallarm across our customers, what advice would you give to people on the line today about having that tough conversation with executives on the cost and trade-off from a risk perspective?
Everybody's talking about it. Now is the time. If you were affected by the outage, every executive is talking about it. Don't lose the opportunity to talk about it. Nothing may change, but that's okay. Be a great partner to your business and go, what do you want to have changed?
Yeah, strike while the iron's hot, and I like what you just said, be a partner to your business. I think that's key, right? We all have a job and we all have a job to do, and it's important to speak up when the time is right. And well, great. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Tim. I do appreciate it. Um, are there any other questions from around the room before we conclude today's session?
Let's so I'm sorry, I'm looking through some of the comments in LinkedIn. So let's I want to hit on a couple of these. So
Yeah, definitely.
it does look like there are some people that pulled out their DR plans, but they were reliant on DNS services that were down. Yeah, so that's a problem. So again, is multi-cloud the only way of doing this? Maybe not, but not reliant on every feature functionality that a cloud has, right? A cloud, you're using their service and their hardware. So maybe the answer is one is fully compliant on AWS, one is not. There are design principles that you can take across the board to be able to create synergies and be able to design and architect around around what may be perceived as a single point of failure for a vendor. I just think that's interesting. Like if there's no DNS, you're not failing over, which is very true. And so at that point, is multi-cloud the only way to do it? I don't know. It'd be interesting to have that conversation. So I, I think it's something to contemplate in every business.
Yeah.
So let's see if there's any more. Well, I think those are.
Yeah, I think we've covered it. Well, again, Tim, thank you for your time and your expertise and sharing your knowledge here today. Thank you to our audience for joining. And again, we look forward to having more discussions in the future. We hope you were able to learn from today's discussion, and have a great rest of your day.